and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm Lady J.
And I'm Miss Ann.
Today, we're going to talk about the stigma of mental health because let's face it, this is a topic that's not talked about, and it tends to be like a taboo or a stigma in our community, and that hinders our open communication and our relationships. And on the public side, it involves the negative or discriminatory attitudes that others often have about mental illness, right? And for the person that could be dealing with mental health, it can also have a sense of shame or even embarrassment. And when we really think about it, more than half of people with mental illness don't receive help for their disorders. And statistics actually show that 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 6 youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. 50% of lifetime mental illnesses, you guys, begins by the age of 14 and 75% by the age of 24. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34 years of age. The stigma, it often comes from a lack of understanding or fear. And no matter how much education is out there, many people still have that negative view of those with mental illness. And then when you think about the media, think about our communities, friends and family, and even our own self-image, that all plays a part in an individual seeking their treatment. And unfortunately, this can also contribute to worsening their symptoms and reduce that likelihood for someone to also get the treatment that they need. You know, Ms. Ann, there was a recent study done that showed that this stigma, it leads to negative effects on the recovery among people who are diagnosed with severe mental illnesses. And it also showed that it lowers their self-esteem. They have difficulties with social relationships. They self-isolate from their friends and family. They'll have difficulties at work, and it can even increase their psychiatric symptoms. Now, a person can start to feel like they're suffocating in a sense, because let's face it, no one wants to talk about mental health, right? And even our friends and family, they're often left in the dark because they're not educated or they're not aware of how these symptoms and conditions like depression and PTSD can actually affect our daily lives.
You know, I think that's a good segue into what mental illness is not. It's not people acting crazy or attention seeking or trying to get out of doing something. It's something we can't see. I think we tend to see someone with a missing arm or disfigurement on their face and say, oh, it's something wrong. But mental illness doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So when we think about mental illness, it's a disorder. It's a psychiatric disorder that's characterized by behavior or mental patterns that cause significant distress or impairment of a person's daily functioning. These include symptoms that are persistent, relapsing, remitting, or these can happen as a single episode. So when you think about your daily functioning, that's how we do everything. That's us waking up in the morning, taking a shower, brushing our teeth, combing our hair, fixing breakfast. When you have a mental illness, these things can be interrupted.
That's so true, you know, and that makes me think back to one of my daughters who has a mental illness. But before we realized that she had a mental illness, it all started with her not wanting to get out of bed, her not wanting to bathe or get dressed. And with her having children, it was even hard for her to push herself to, you know, get up and take care of them. But as soon as she would feed them, bathe them, and things like that, it's like she's right back in the bed. You know, she had absolutely no energy. And, you know, when she was, I remember her talking to me about that and going through those symptoms, but I just did not put two and two together. Like, wait a minute, you know, is she dealing with depression? Is something else, you know, deeper going on here? We look at these symptoms and I don't know, it's like we don't take it seriously, or we just kind of tend to push it under the rug, you know?
Definitely, especially culturally, within the Black community. This child lazy. All she want to do was sleep. We
Yeah.
don't look beyond what is happening in that moment. It's just she don't never do nothing. I asked her to clean, she don't clean. I asked her to,
Yes.
take the trash out, she don't do this. He doesn't do that, and we write it off as this child just lazy. She didn't get the work ethic that I got.
Yes, yes. And then just in thinking about the statistics on mental illness, going back to our children and our youth, I was really alarmed to read that it actually can start at the age of 6 years old, because you don't hear, like you were just saying, how we tend to write off even adults as being lazy. When we
Mhm.
have children, it's like you look at their behaviors and you always want to associate it maybe with bad parenting or something.
Definitely. And even piggybacking off that, starting at 6 years old, it's even younger than that. We have now what's called infant and toddler mental health,
Wow. Wow.
intervening early because that's how early mental health starts. That we have
Yes.
coming into the daycares, into the schools, and in the early childhood program. We have specialists that specialize in infant and toddler mental health. So when you think about, being mentally ill in childhood, that's not my baby. You're not talking
Yes.
about my baby. You're gonna give my baby a chance. You're gonna give my baby a chance. You're not gonna label him. And
Yes.
that's another issue that lives, that we're not intervening early enough because we can't process it.
Mm-hmm.
He's 2 months, he's 6 months, he's 9 months. No, this is too early. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And
And
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
It can just be difficult to understand mental health disorders in children because of normal child development. And
Okay.
that process consists of change. Children are changing all the time. They are reaching milestones. They're crawling, they're walking, they're talking, they're putting sentences together, they're writing their name. So some things are typical childhood changes that our kids are going through. So
Yeah.
the symptoms that we're looking for in children, they differ depending on the child's age and circumstances. And it's hard for children to explain what they're feeling, what they're going through, or why they're behaving in a certain way.
Oh, yes. And that brings me back to a memory also of, with my background being in domestic violence, being a survivor as well as now working in the field. Oftentimes we don't realize that what we're going through in our daily lives as an adult, how it affects our children.
Yes.
Because I remember when my son, he began lashing out. All of his bad behavior actually started when he was in the first grade. And
Mm,
I did not understand that, that behavior was associated with what was going on in the home. And it was really sad also, of course, we're many, 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 many years later. He's what, 25, 26 now. But back then, it seemed as if the educators were not educated on mental health.
definitely.
They want to just, label them off as being a troubled student or, a bad child. I mean, I remember getting phone calls from the teachers of him running out the classroom, him hiding under the desk, and for a parent, you just don't associate those behaviors with a mental illness or a PTSD. Because I mean, let's face it, it's specifically even with domestic violence, that's not only PTSD for the individual, but that's PTSD for, the children and others in the home that are witnessing that. But it was sad that the educators who are supposed to be trained in this field are not recognizing that or putting, the two and two together.
Correct. I think that's more in recent years that we're even looking into the fact that, and acknowledging the fact that our children are affected by the experiences that goes on around them.
Yes.
A lot of people tend to write domestic violence off, mental health, PTSD off because nothing happened to him. He wasn't never hit. He wasn't never neglected. But we forget our kids have eyes and ears. They take in things auditorily and visually. So no, your child may not be affected, but we have to consider DNA, from both parents. We have to consider a lot of other factors, such as why is mommy and daddy, or mommy and her boyfriend, or mommy and her girlfriend doing all this yelling and fighting and cursing? I can't sleep.
Oh, yes.
So we have to consider all the facts.
Exactly.
Even though it may not be happening directly, I guess in a sense it is happening directly because they're involved. They're there, whether in another room with, a thin wall separates you. They're taking it in just as much as you. And then they have that anxiety and fear being instilled in them.
Absolutely. That is so true. That was interesting what you said a few minutes ago about, it being hereditary. I never knew that mental illness could be hereditary.
Yeah, it can run in the family. When you think about schizophrenia, bipolar, major depression, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, that's another issue, in the community, acknowledging that I dealt with it, my siblings dealt with it, my parents dealt with it, my aunt, my uncle. Yeah, it can definitely be, genetic.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense now because I know as I was growing up, my mother dealt with depression, and then I have a brother that dealt with depression, and now I have a daughter that deals with depression.
Mm-hmm.
So, and having this conversation and tying all of the pieces together, this really makes a lot of sense. And I think within our communities, this is an area and something that we tend to shy away from when we really need to pay closer attention to it, because these numbers are alarming. And then especially, since COVID, that's when I noticed mental health starting to be talked about, a lot more was during this whole pandemic.
I can agree. And I think for very good reason. When you think about isolation, I can't go to work and I'm at home. I'm with my abuser. I have nothing to do. It's nowhere to go. Nothing's open. A lot of those things tend to peak in those situations, especially isolation, depression. I already struggle with social anxiety, being around people. Now I have no choice but to be at home with my thoughts.
Yes. Yeah.
That can be scary for a lot of people.
Exactly. Now, Miss Ann, what would you say to our listeners? What could be some symptoms, let's say for bipolar? Because when I think of bipolar, the only thing that I really know about that is a change or a change in their personality, where they can go from hot to cold in a second type deal. That's all I really know about bipolar. So could you explain to our listeners maybe more in depth what bipolar is? How like are there more symptoms to look out for on how we can identify someone that may have a bipolar disorder?
Yes, and keep in mind that every individual is just that, an individual.
Okay.
The classifications can be different. So this is just general information just to look for and see, but no way am I diagnosing anyone.
Right.
So bipolar 1 disorder is a criteria represented by the modern understanding of the classic manic depressive disorder, or affective psychosis.
Okay.
Differing from that classic description to the extent that neither psychosis nor the lifetime experience of major depressive episodes is a requirement. So you don't have to have these long depressive episodes in order to be deemed or diagnosed as bipolar 1. So the vast majority.
Now, Miss Ann.
Okay.
Write this down in layman terms, because you just lost me.
No, no problem. So when you think about bipolar 1 disorder,
Okay.
another name for it, let's say manic depressive, have these highs and lows
Okay.
of depression,
Okay.
or it could be a psychosis.
Okay.
And these things could come in episodes. You have to be careful because some people have only one episode in this moment in time from these traumatic events. And some have more persistent everyday persistence with the disorder that's affecting them.
So what would be an example? So how could someone identify if a family or friend one has, may possibly have, bipolar? It's like a tongue twister there.
Yes, definitely. So according to the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, you have to meet a criteria.
Okay.
So it has to be certain criteria that this person has to meet within a certain time frame in order to be diagnosed with a certain disorder. So no one is just bipolar because we feel they're bipolar. It's because they're meeting a criteria that's outlined within a DSM-5. So a manic episode. So before we can say a person is bipolar, do they have a period of abnormal and persistent, elevated, or irritable mood?
Okay. So that goes back to where I was saying the change in their mood going from happy to sad or from happy to angry in a split second.
Yeah.
Okay.
So these criteria, you have to see over a period of time, not just once.
Okay. So a pattern.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're going to have to do a show strictly on the bipolar disorder. Seems like there's a lot of detail there that goes into that.
I think it's a lot of details in all of them.
Okay.
And keep in mind too, with mental health, diagnosis can change. What you can think or what a professional psychiatrist can think is bipolar can really just be major depressive. It could be schizophrenia. It could be, no, I thought it was schizophrenia. I think it's schizoaffective. So it could change depending on the person because we are changing beings. We change all the time.
Sure.
So it really, that's why it's so individualized. That's why when you see one person, just like your brother can be this, doesn't mean Johnny that we know from work is this because he's displaying some of the similarities that you've seen in your brother.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
You have to really look at individuals just as that, an individual. And sometimes you can have occurring situations, meaning it's more than one thing going on at a time.
Okay.
That's why it's important for us to get professional help so we can seek, accurate diagnosis, because it's not a cookie cutter approach. And I think when people have abnormal behavior or what we deem to be abnormal or crazy behavior, we just assign, oh, he bipolar. We just assign it automatically.
Okay.
And that could not be true.
Sure. And that goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, as far as, there's so many people that have mental health challenges and the whole stigma that's associated with it, because people aren't opening up about it. People aren't talking about it. They're being looked down on, or as you'll hear some people say, oh, she crazy, and of course, no one likes to be told that they're crazy. No, they're not crazy. They just have, a mental illness. They have something that they're dealing with, but that doesn't mean that they're any different than you are to a certain extent,
True. The question is, and I always ask, because we don't know a lot of things, do we want to know?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Do we want to look beyond the surface of this person in this moment and what's not going right to figure out why it's not going right. What's
Yeah.
going on? How did we get here? And I think a lot of that has to do with our patience in trying to really understand instead of writing it off and not wanting to be bothered
Mm-hmm.
because we don't desire this particular attitude or behavior.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that stems from, well, not stems from, but when you think about relationships, when
Mm-hmm.
having your challenges, and when one person that may be dealing with mental illness and the other one doesn't understand, nor are they trying to understand, or maybe you just might tell them, that you deal with depression or you deal with PTSD or trauma or whatever the case may be. And instead of them taking the time out to learn about it and to learn how they can support you, which I think would be really great to talk about in another show, is how can you support family and loved ones that are going through it?
Definitely.
Because
Because
it's,
that's,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Because I think we all need support in so many different areas, especially when it comes to our thoughts and feelings. And not
Yeah.
without, I guess without that fear of being judged.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I know a lot of times we can, I really want to tell Lady J, but I don't want her to judge me. We stop our own thinking and assistance
Yes.
and seeking out help because we already know he finna judge me, she finna judge me. They're gonna think I'm crazy
Or are
because
they
I'm
going to
feeling
throw it,
this.
or are they going to throw it back up in my face?
Mm,
That's another one, you
definitely,
trust people.
that's true. When you think about your deep inner feelings and emotions, that's not something to take lightly and to hand to anybody. I'm gonna just tell the world how I feel. That's typically not what people do. It's only a trusted, handful of
Yeah.
people we want to do. Even if it's one person, I think we're doing good by saying everybody may have at least one person they can talk to, because a lot of people don't even have that one person.
That is so true. That's so true. It's that embarrassment comes in.
Definitely.
Yeah, that
But at
embarrassment.
the same time, I need help, but I don't know how to ask for it.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it going to stay between us, or is this going to get out? Are they going to throw it back up in my face? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to support me? And so many different questions start to run through your mind, where you get to a point of where you become isolated. You isolate yourself from the world and others, and and just feel like no one will understand, or no one does understand. You feel like you're alone.
I can agree. And now, even in the midst of this conversation, while we're talking about adults. Imagine children.
Oh, yes. Oh,
If that's adults feeling that way, how you think a 2-year-old feels, a
exactly.
5-year-old, a 10-year-old?
Yeah. One that can
Especially,
express themselves.
agreed.
Yeah.
And depending on upbringing, are you in that family where you are to be seen and not heard?
Yes. Oh, wow. That is so powerful right there. Yes, you cannot express yourself at all. So the question becomes, how can we all do our part to help people not feel alone, who are struggling with mental health? And when I say we, the community, everyone, how can we do our part to help someone, a friend, a family member? How can we do our part to help others not feel alone that is struggling with mental health? Because understanding mental health and even well-being, that's a lifelong journey. And
Yes.
site, we all have mental health, whether it's positive or negative. Mental health is so very important. And that's why oftentimes you'll hear people talk a lot about self-care. It's
Yeah.
important that we take care of ourselves. So our show, Mental Health Matters, Miss Ann and myself, Lady Jodine, Lady J, our show is aimed to educate and to empower our communities about mental health. So if you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, we really need you to know that there are resources available with trained professionals out here that can support you. You can start that conversation with a doctor and get a referral. There's also lots of websites, and there's also a mental health hotline that we would like to share with you guys called NAMI. So the NAMI Health Helpline is 1-800-950-NAMI, which is NAMI, or you can text the word NAMI, NAMI, to 741741 to connect with a crisis counselor. And please, you guys, remember that if you do text NAMI or if you call them, that this line is a free, confidential 24/7 support right at your fingertips.
Yes.
And also, Miss Ann, do you have the suicide hotline phone number by chance available?
Do I have it? Not directly looking at me.
Okay, that's fine. We can share it on another episode that just came to me. www.mentalhealth.gov. That's an awesome website that you guys can go to no matter what location that you stay in. They have a ton of resources on that website. And we just really want you to remember that you are not alone in this journey. There are loved ones, there are professionals, there are people out here that want to help.
Correct. And I do have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number,
Okay, awesome.
and this is available 24 hours a day. And the number is 1-800-273-8255.
Awesome. Well, you guys, you've heard it here, right here on Mental Health Matters. And we look forward to having you back, listening to our show as we continue to dive into this topic. And we will be sharing and discussing different mental health disorders, how to support others that you know that may be dealing with it. We'll even have some dynamite speakers and interviews on our show with other mental health professionals that can help just give more insight. So with that being said, we are signing off, and thank you so much for listening to Mental Health Matters with Lady J and Miss Ann.
Thank you.